Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 31st of December 2023. This is indeed the last day of 2023, the final Frontline update for this year, in a year that has been full of all sorts concerning this war. Ups and downs, hopes and hopes dashed. This war continues. It doesn't look like ending anytime soon, but I do have hopes that 2024 will see the conclusion to the main part of this war. But who knows? It really does depend upon the unity of allies, the unity of those standing behind and with Ukraine, and their desire to bring this thing to a close as soon as possible. And I think it's well within the ability of allied nations to bring this war to a close in favour of Ukraine. It can easily be done. Is there the political will to do it? Is there the political courage to do it in face of potential escalation? Helping too much might poke the bear into some kind of frenzy. Well, I don't think that Vladimir Putin, the dictator in charge of Russia, has actually shown any strength in the face of unity and in the face of strength indeed from opposition. He does much better in the face of weakness than he does in the face of strength. And so all we need to do is stand up to Putin so that those red lines are crossed and yet again nothing happens. We need to provide Ukraine with as much and as many different types of equipment, pieces of equipment, munitions that they need. We need to give them longer range equipment. And it doesn't have to be we can sell them longer range equipment. But essentially the money will probably be coming from allied nations itself. So either or. Longer range equipment and huge amounts of artillery and mortar ammunition to go with whatever else we give them in terms of airframes and vehicles for combined arms maneuvers and whatnot. You know what we need to give them. We talked about it plenty of times before, whether it be Taurus, longer range ATACMS, or just the ATACMS that they've already had some of. F-16s, Gripens. Wouldn't it be great if they could get hold of Tomahawks or other missiles that could be fired a long way, as well as producing their own? I think this year is going to be a year of indigenous production for Ukraine, and we'll see drones and missiles, as well as APCs and IFVs come off the production line for Ukraine. I'm hopeful for that, and I think, you know, if the nations that are standing with Ukraine can unite, and if their industrial capacities can be brought together for the ultimate goal of Ukraine's success, then I don't think Russia have much of a hope. As I said in 2022, and as I said this week again, in looking at the amount that China is actually helping Russia behind the scenes in terms of imports, exports, economic help, that is the only hope Russia has. China is the only hope Russia has to prevailing in this war. Without China, there is no way that Russia can prevail. And when we look at the front line today, and we see that actually there's been no movement as according to any of the mappers. And I have to say, especially after Andrew Perpetua had a big sort of rant on Twitter about people who nicked his maps without any attribution, I have to say a massive heartfelt thank you to the work that Andrew Perpetua has done. And what I do ask is that all of you go and subscribe to him on Twitter and also on YouTube. And if you have the wherewithal, help him a little bit financially with his mapping as he incurs the costs that he does in order to get that mapping to us all. please support him as much as possible. But just a massive thanks to Andrew Perpetua, and I guess to Surreal Maps. I don't agree with their positioning in the war, but I do use them as a source for my own mapping, and of course the great work of Deep State Maps as well. In fact, Deep State Maps have reached out to me to collaborate for me to just throw out some of their info and whatnot, and highlight the work they're doing, and I've been unable to do so just because I am so kind of overworked in the sense that I'm so pressed for time. But I should shout about them a little bit more next year, because I think the work that Deep State do is also really, really valuable. But as you can see, none of the mappers show any movement along the front line, from Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna, past Bakhmut to Avdiivka, past Avdiivka to Mariinka and Novomykhailivka, round the Dogleg to Velika Novosilka, until we get to Robotyne in the Zaporizhia frontline area. And in this sector, there is quite some significant movement for the Russians to the southwest of Verbove. Indeed, really crossing that Surovikin line, the manned trench line here, moving towards or possibly up the tank ditches and the Dragon's Teeth line further up here, so that the Ukrainians appear to have been largely pushed back from that defensive line. It seems to have swapped hands again to be in Russian hands. Interestingly, Surreal Maps hasn't caught up yet with that. Thank you very much to JR, who has done the mapping today. Of course, huge thanks to him. They've pushed a little bit, the Russians, out of Verbove towards the west, but the larger movements are in this pocket between where they had advanced previously in the last few days, up this major tree line there, between Robotyne and Verbove, and now they're joining the dots. So it looks like this is an area where I think the Ukrainians will, I don't mean be happy to concede, but if you're going to concede anywhere to the Russians, if you're going to cede territory to them anywhere along the front line, my thoughts are that this area is the least valuable for the Ukrainians. It doesn't, if they lost this and went back to where they were at the beginning of the counteroffensive, they haven't really lost any meaningful territory in terms of logistics, in terms of buffer zones to anywhere else. So that won't be the case if they were to lose this ground between these two areas, north and south of Avdiivka, or northwest and southwest of Avdiivka. If they close the neck here and lost Avdiivka, then that would actually have some impact on how Ukraine would be able to hit Donetsk, because of course this allows them to strike Donetsk more easily with artillery and whatnot, and it has ramifications elsewhere as well, in the same way that if Mariinka is lost, or not so much Mariinka, but these towns further to the west, and if Novomykhailivka was lost, that would have some effect on these other places and operationally in that whole area, in a way that I think Robotyne just has, in a way that Robotyne doesn't. Now, to continue, there are some gains for the Russians further to the west of where we were just talking about, the previous gains, nearer Novoprokopivka. So it looks like all along this southern part of this Robotyne sector, the Russians are gaining. And that's really all the movement we have on the map today. Nothing from Dnipro River, nothing, as I've said, from anywhere else along the front line. Just a couple of observations from a few people here. Military Lab says, so yeah, after almost a month after this post, it seems that northwest of Bakhmut, the Russians have advanced. The advance has indeed slowed down, just like I predicted, amid the many claims made by pro-Russian and Russia-neutral sources about the about an imminent collapse and a major breakthrough of the Russian forces in this direction. The current front line is more or less around the same line that Wagner forces were able to reach earlier this year, shown in the quoted post below. As recent reports suggest that clashes are ongoing near Bodanivka and the Popovska area, Russian forces have been able to make only slight advances compared to the front line in May 2023. So here's the most positive outlook for Ukraine at the moment. And the positives are that the Russians have not advanced meaningfully north of Bakhmut or even south of Bakhmut for a good number of days, and that there are rumors that they have stopped attacking so much because they are basically reconstituting or accumulating forces to go again. The worry is that they're going to go again. But for the time being, grinding to a halt and having the Ukrainians push back near Bodanivka, because it's important to keep the defensive line here, so Chaziv Yar is kept in Ukrainian hands, solidly in Ukrainian hands. It's important they put up defenses somewhere, and I think doing the counterattacks there makes sense to me. I think that is good news because the Russians haven't been able to continue their momentum. Now, that may only be a 3 or 4 day pause, so that it might be different tomorrow or the next day, and I might eat my words, and if I do, hey, so be it. But it's looking better for the Ukrainians than it was, say, a week ago. And the same can be said about this neck around Avdiivka. Although the Russians are making incremental gains, just, areas of fields, tens of meters of tree lines to the northwest of Stepova, the Ukrainians have been able to stop the Russians in and around Stepova. We're seeing footage coming out again, some more Bradley footage I saw today. When I said I didn't see any yesterday, but recently there's been a lot of Bradley footage coming out of the Stepova area, where the general Avdiivka area, where the Ukrainians have been fighting back hard, the 47th Brigade fighting back hard against the Russians there. And I think that's important. And the fact that we have not seen any movement around here today, I think shows if we're going to interpret that as positively as possible, not that I want to, but I think this could well be the case that the Russians are struggling with, given the amount of personnel and equipment that they have lost. That's unsurprising, but they are struggling to continue that momentum forward in and around Avdiivka. That's not to say they won't continue incrementally gaining here and there over the weeks. Now, what I would like to know is whether there will be a large-scale push again like we have seen, because we've seen a number of those pushes around Avdiivka and they have lost huge amounts of equipment and personnel. And the same can be said about Sinkivka and in that sector as well. So perhaps to some degree Yehidne and Ivanivska over here. So the most positive interpretation is that the Ukrainians have forced the Russians, or the Russians really have forced themselves into some sort of culmination. The question is, will they have enough forces to go again? What are their intentions? Do they need to basically reconstitute as much as the Ukrainians do after the Ukrainians' counter-offensive? We've had several months of the Russians piling on, column after column into different areas and being attrited, I think, dangerously. So I'm just unsure whether the Russians really have anything meaningful left in the tank. If they are just going to throw newly mobilized troops at the problem, then that would suggest that they don't have a depth in reserves at all, and that they are unable really. I mean, if you think about maximally, they are going to be unable to take the Donbass. I mean, you look at the whole of Ukraine, they can't do that. They're not going to be able to get to Odessa. There's no way the Russians can reach, the borders of Transnistria and Moldova over here. Just think of how long it has taken to take Bakhmut, right? That's that area. That's taken them a year more, really, to take this area. Okay? Popasna's there. Goodness me. How long ago was that now? So this area, zoom out, that's what? That? How many of those do you need to get to Transnistria? You've got to go through Mykolaiv. What are the chances that Russians have got the ability to do that? And they just don't. So I'm relatively positive. Like a few weeks ago, I was thinking, the counteroffensive didn't achieve as much as the Ukrainians would have liked, but it achieved some really significant gains in other ways other than territory. And I've talked about that an awful lot. But in terms of territory, it hasn't. However, I talked about a hierarchy of goals, and territory is your ultimate goal, but until you get these other things in place first, you will not achieve that goal. So now I think you're going to see, and I'm repeating myself because it's the 31st of December, just kind of summarizing the year and where we're at. Ukraine will concentrate, or at least they will want to concentrate. Whether they are able to achieve these things due to a lack of weaponry is another thing. But they will be concentrating in this winter period until spring, and probably through spring largely, in attriting Russian logistics, attriting Russian force accumulations, taking out air bases, taking out equipment consistently, like we've seen for the last few months. If you think that Malatok Machka sort of small disaster, relatively small disaster, we talk about that as a big loss of Ukrainian equipment, but compared to the Russian losses that we've seen, it's not huge. And the Ukrainians, as soon as that happened, they stopped to say, right, we're not going to do that. And that was the end of their I think the end of their really big significant pushes for territory, and everything else was grinding, but they did it by infantry, not by mechanized equipment. And what they then said is, right, we need to attrit the Russian equipment from a distance, and they've been doing that ever since. And the numbers we have seen posted on a daily basis, even if you take a third of those figures off, have been absolutely astounding. So the Russians have been attrited, and if you take another 4 months of that, 3 months of that, now 4 months, 5 months, I don't know how long, if the Ukrainians can keep that up, you are going to get to a point where in, say, for example, April, May next year, the Russians will have been fundamentally degraded. And that's when the Ukrainians, if they can spend that time defending and attriting, like we are seeing in Sinkivka, like we are seeing in Avdiivka, if they can hold on to most of their ground and make sure that the Russians there's a massive toll exacted on the Russians for every meter of ground that they take, then when it comes to April and May next year, the Ukrainians, and if we give them enough proper equipment that they need, the stuff they ask for, and if they've got F-16s coming online, and if they've got their own indigenous missiles with greater range, then we will see Ukraine in a very different position, I think, than we saw them previously. That counteroffensive that took place in 2023, they kind of felt they had to go for it. They were asking for more weapons. They didn't get them on time. They didn't get Abrams till September. And we haven't seen any of those brought to bear yet. So, you know, they didn't get ATACMS till after the counteroffensive finished. Right? And the first night they got them, they took out 2 air bases. Like, imagine what they can do if we give them the stuff they need. Imagine that $61 billion, and there's rumors that they've been working over this recess period in Congress, such that virtually, so they've been doing it online. Apparently, there are some rumors that they made really great progress in negotiating on the southern border in the US. Imagine if 2 weeks into January, that $61 billion is given the green light, and the first deliveries are huge amounts of ATACMS. Imagine that, and then it just goes from there. You know, the US are key to this, but together with that, you've got a massive ramping up of European production and commitment from European nations. Germany saying, right, if America aren't stepping in, we've got to step up. Imagine then America step back in. You've just got the best of all those worlds, and suddenly the Ukrainians have an awful lot of kit. Then, if they can mobilize, and the big challenge for the Ukrainians is what happens after March the 17th. So, presidential elections, Putin obviously gets in. If they then do a national mobilization, that is a challenge. But if they can continue attriting at these rates up until March the 17th, what do the Russian population, general population, say? What do the wives and mothers say? And if that then continues, if that kind of level of attrition continues after March the 17th, if Ukraine are provided with enough weaponry and the right kind of weaponry to continue doing so, then you might have a very uneasy domestic population in Russia. So those are my hopes. The challenges that Ukraine face, though, where could this all go wrong? One, national mobilization of Russian personnel. Two, China. And that's really it. Yeah, they're going to get given ammunition from North Korea. Somehow we need to stop that, but that's going to come to an end at some point. And as long as the combined West can outproduce Russia and North Korea, again, as I said, the problem is China and those raw materials that China might provide to both nations to produce those munitions. But if the West can outproduce Russia, and if economically they can compete Russia, which they can, but if we can commit to Ukraine in such a meaningful, united way that you and I have been calling for, then there's no reason this war doesn't go in a really positive direction for Ukraine, and this could be ended in 2024. It just depends on the unity of allied nations, and it depends largely on China and the role they are going to play going forward. And just to give you another little bit of analysis here, this is Tendar, the German analyst, saying the Battle of Avdiivka is still very much ongoing, but if Ukrainians continue to play their cards as they did in the last 2.5 months, then it can already be assessed to be an operational victory for Ukraine. I'd agree. And that's my thoughts about Bakhmut, by the way. I have been posting about this since early October, and when the initial Russian attacks failed spectacularly, I knew that it will all go downhill for the Russians, and so it did. I also said that Avdiivka is the single greatest reason for Russia's demographic catastrophe, and I wasn't much exaggerating. Losing tens of thousands of men in such a small area warrants this assessment, but far worse is the fact that each and every Russian soldier who gets destroyed is not only one less Putin can use to terrorize Ukrainians, but also one less which can be used to sustain Russia's war economy. So that's a really important point, but I will elaborate on this point in a separate post. M2 Bradleys and Leopard 2 will continue to decimate the Russian army in the most efficient way, the very thing they have been designed for, and they will do this with flying colours. So obviously, bullish opinion there. It is also no secret anymore that killing, and the reason he's saying that, by the way, is referring to that Forbes article about the Bradleys, and I think that's broadly correct at the moment. They are doing a good job. It is also no secret anymore that killing scores of Russian invaders is the most efficient way in Avdiivka, with a fraction of their own losses. It's a prime objective of the Ukrainian army in this sector. The numerous videos coming from Avdiivka, specifically Stepova, I posted prove this very fact. The efforts of the Ukrainian 47th Brigade and the other Ukrainian formations will be one of the main reasons why Russia squandered considerable resources for nothing. Finally, some Western news pages are catching up on this development. The Forbes article summarizes my points. Here is a link to the article, and I went through that with you this morning because it's such an important, it's giving the correct context to what is going on the front line, unlike some of the other news sources which have been very, very sort of doom posting about Ukraine's chances going forward or the kind of need to appease, and I don't think that's the case at all. If you think where Ukraine are now compared to a year ago, my goodness, Ukraine are in a fantastic position, and they've destroyed 20% of the Black Sea Fleet. The Black Sea Fleet have sailed off with their tails between their legs to Novorossiysk, right? A huge success. Meanwhile, and this has happened today, there's reports that Crimea has been hammered again by Ukrainian munitions. I don't know exactly what, but I think there's been several attacks on Sevastopol. We'll have a look overnight and see if that came to fruition. But, you've got bridges having been destroyed. You've got depots being destroyed consistently. You've got partisan activity. HIMARS still doing their jobs. Drones doing their jobs. Storm Shadow still doing their jobs. There are some huge successes that the Ukrainians have had over the last 6 months. Is not just about the failure to take territory. It's about the success in pushing the Russians back in the Black Sea, about taking out key installations. So I am positive for the Ukrainians at the moment. And just the two more things to very quickly say. Now, there's, as I said, two things I want to mention. One is you guys. Thank you for everything this year. I've said it once already today, but I really do mean it. You guys allow me to do what I do, but also inspire me to do what I do. And I'm still as obsessed as I ever was about this war. I don't know what that says about me, but the community that you guys have built up around this channel is I'm just honoured. So thank you for you. Give yourselves a huge pat on the back. And I think this is summed up by Nick. And this isn't supposed to be in any way self-aggrandizing. I'm reading this out because it's really kind for her to say this, but also it goes to show the power of you guys as a community. And you can see that in terms of what you guys have done in raising money for what Greg Terry and Prof. Curtis and myself have done, but mainly those two. So she says, the horrors that Ukraine is and has been enduring are inconceivable. I am so sorry. May this passing year mark the ending of Russian aggression forever. Happy victorious new year, Jonathan. You've been reliable, dedicated, relentless warrior in the information war. You upload more content, information and cathartic release than anyone else. We do actually love you and love the team community. We have all types here. Each day we gather, listen, feel, think and share ourselves. We take what we gain here and translate it into concrete action, financial, informational, emotional, and we make part of this world better in some way. Goodness me, I can't tell you how much that means. If that is true and you are taking, things that I say, advice I give, information I impart, and use that for the good of the world, then job done. We nurture an energy, consciousness of unity, despite the trolls, egos, beliefs and perspectives. We show that freedom, unity and love can overcome the darkest of evil and horrors that seek to destroy us. At the center of our glorious circle is Ukraine, never far from our thoughts, lips and hearts. Our devotion to a country, in many cases far away geographically, is unshakable. We realize that Ukraine is our neighbor, friend, family. We are humans fighting an enemy of everything that can be celebrated about humanity. We love Ukraine and thank her for awakening this enduring spirit in us. We love each other and will continue together. My friends, my extended yet intimate family, I love you. So thank you, Nikki Owen. That is an insanely generous of spirit comment to make, but also talks very much about all these ideas in such a beautiful way. And I guess the silver lining to the cloud that is the war in Ukraine is hopefully in some of us, in seeing darkness, like seeing the cloud, we become that silver lining and we possibly have emotions and sentiments and realizations awakened in us that otherwise wouldn't have been provoked. Perhaps we would have been carrying on our normal lives, thinking about our jobs more, about, I don't know, what book to read next or what colour to paint the wall in our living room. And we can still do all that. But now I think there's been this fire that has been stoked in our bellies and in our hearts and in our minds that hopefully will provoke us to do good things to make the world a better place and to fight what I think is the evil of despotic and authoritarian dictatorial Russia. We will fight the good fight. For whatever reason allies get behind Ukraine, whether it be for one geopolitical strategic reason or another, for us, this is, I guess, a moral battle. And the Ukrainians are fighting that battle on these front lines with their lives. We can hopefully do them justice by backing that up with good moral behavior in the virtual world and in the real world with our friends around a water cooler, our colleagues who might come out with the accidental bit of Russian propaganda, and we set them straight. So let's fight the good fight in the information spaces while those good Ukrainian people are fighting in the trenches. Anyway, Happy New Year, everybody. Take care. Big love. And finally, let the resurrection of Bucha, after the ordeal that it suffered in the Bucha massacre involving the death and torture and war criminal activity of the Russians, let this resurrected place give you hope for 2024.